Hey, what's up guys, it's Benbalk and welcome back to the 50th Slimekeep Devlog. In this devlog, I added in a bunch of replayability to the game. Also, if you're new here, Slimekeep is a fast-paced roguelike where you must kill and capture slimes to stop the corruption that has infected your land. Without further ado, let's get into it. So to start, let's go over some changes to some of the weapons and upgrades in the game. Firstly, I got some feedback that the upgrade descriptions in the game were a bit too vague. For example, I'd often write does more damage when describing certain upgrades, which just wasn't the most clear. So I changed all these upgrades to have specific values such as 50% more damage instead, which I think helped. Next, I also got some feedback from some playtesters that was annoying that in the weapon shop, you couldn't really tell what each weapon did exactly before purchasing it. So to fix this issue, I decided to make some changes to this board here. Previously, it would display a task for the player to do in order to gain a discount on shop items, but admittedly, this system wasn't really that effective. So I scrapped this discount logic, but kept the art and transformed it into this information panel concept. Then I added in a few more fields to each weapon in the game so I could specify things like fire rate and a quick description. And with a bit of setup later, now the player could walk up to any weapon in the shop and view some information about it before purchasing, which I think was a nice touch. Then on a similar note, we had this pre-existing arsenal inside of the player's computer. Right now, this arsenal would just display the name of each weapon, but to provide a bit more information, I created this new template for each pop-up with a bunch more statistics for each weapon. Then I filled out all these templates for all the weapons in the game, and boom, now the player would have a much more detailed rundown for each weapon they have unlocked. Next up, let's talk about replayability in the game. In the last devlog, I added in a bit of replayability in the form of a challenge mode that is unlocked after beating the game. But still, this didn't feel like enough, so I got to work on another bonus mode in the game to add more replayability, in which I called Slime Rush. Essentially, the idea was that this mode would also unlock after beating the game once, and would operate similarly to how the original Jam version of Slimekeep did. If you're new here or just don't know, Slimekeep started development over 4 years ago now as a game jam game for the Ludum Dare 46 game jam. The original version of the game made in 48 hours is quite different to what you see now, as it kind of operated like a wave-based shooter minigame where you try to get the highest score possible. So to pay homage to this, I thought it'd be really cool to reimagine the original version of this game into a cool bonus mode called Slime Rush. So to get started making this mode, I first added the statue to the player's basement area, similar to the challenge mode statue where the player could activate Slime Rush. Then when the player actually activated the statue, I made it so that it would take the player to this new scene in the game. And this scene that I created looked nearly identical to the hub area, except when stepping outside we had 4 different rooms the player could enter from all 4 cardinal directions. Firstly, to the left we had a standard weapon shop where the player could purchase weapons. Then going up from the hub we had this standard health and ammo shop, and going right from the hub we had this standard upgrade shop. And finally, if the player walked down, we could see there was this very large room where the actual gameplay would take place. And as mentioned, this gameplay would be quite similar to the Game Jam version of the game, except the idea I had in mind was that now instead of being a high score based game, the game would be more waved based. Essentially, the player could enter this big room at the bottom to start the first wave of the game, where slimes would spawn every few seconds for a set period of time. Then, eventually, after defeating all these slimes in the room, the player would be rewarded with some slime balls that they could spend in the shops above. Finally, the player could sleep in their bed to start the next day, and repeat this process all over again with each day or round getting harder, and the goal being for the player to survive as many rounds as possible. So with this idea in mind, I got to work. I started by making the fight room a lot more lively by adding decorations and collidable structures. Then I created the room logic by making so once the player enters this room, this screen will appear displaying the round number and start. And the doors to this room would also close. Next, I worked on the enemy spawn logic for this room, where a random enemy from a specified list would spawn in a random location in the room every few seconds. And after a bit more setup with the spawning system, the game was now kind of playable. After entering the room, enemies would start to spawn every few seconds. And the player could just fight these enemies like normal, but there still wasn't really a game loop yet, and the enemies would spawn indefinitely. So next, I made it that in the player's house, if they go up to their bed, we can see this message that tells them they must beat the current round to progress. So if we head down here and start the first round, hypothetically beat it, and head back up to our house, this text would change. And after a bit more setup later, I made it so that the player could actually sleep and move on to the next round. When entering the arena, the text would update to display the appropriate round number, and the game was really starting to come together. But it was still a little unclear as to when the enemies in a certain round would stop spawning and how many enemies were left in the room overall. So I hopped into Sprite and made this small UI piece that would display this information in the game and update it with each enemy killed. Next, so the player could actually gain slime balls to spend on weapons and upgrades, I gave the player a random amount of slime balls after being a round that would increase with each round played. Now, to wrap things up, I added some statistics here if the player visits their computer, made it so all the shops would properly generate items, and configured the difficulty scaling to make it so with each round played, the enemy spawner would spawn more difficult enemies for a longer period of time, with the spawn rate also increasing. And yeah, that right there is the brand new Slime Rush game mode. Honestly, I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I've gotten pretty positive feedback about it from my playtesters. And yeah, I know this is not necessarily development on the core game loop for Slimekeep itself, but still, I think these minigames and new game modes add a lot more replayability and enjoyment to the game overall. But if you're looking for a great platform overall to learn new skills this summer, check out Skillshare, who is sponsoring today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of creative classes in countless categories ranging from beginner to advanced. We have classes for everything you can imagine, from film to computer science to entrepreneurship, all with a learn by doing approach to teaching. I've always wanted to learn how to automate boring tasks effectively, so I started taking this course on Zapier by Janosch Herman to learn about the world of workflow automation. Within a few minutes, I was able to create my first Zap and automate the process of uploading attachments from Gmail to Google Drive. But there's so much more cool stuff to discover in this field that I never knew about. So if you've had something this summer that you've wanted to learn for a while now, cross it off your bucket list with the help of Skillshare. They even now offer learning paths, which are curated class collections to help you master a specific skill or competency. And to make things better, the first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. But anyways, speaking of replayability, I still had one final trick up my sleeve. And this trick was adding a bunch of statues to the player's basement area as little challenges/achievements that the player could attempt post-game as a fun cosmetic reward. So I made a bunch of different statues in Sprite, and these statues were based on a few existing achievements in the game, as well as some new achievements that I made specifically for these statues. Then I added these statues in-game to the player's basement area and had them being in full color if the player had unlocked the achievement associated with a certain statue, or otherwise being darkened out. So yeah, while this isn't anything crazy, I do think these statues offer a bit more replayability and challenge to the game if the player wants it. However, I want you to head over to the Slimekeep Steam page and press that wishlist button right now. Seriously, it helps out a ton, and if you made it this far in the video, hopefully the game interests you enough that you wouldn't mind taking a few seconds out of your day to click a few buttons. Thanks. But now moving on from replayability, I made a few more minor tweaks and added bits of polish to the game. First, I got some feedback from my playtesters that wasn't always the most clear to the player when they were on low health. And this was definitely a valid concern, so I added in these health spikes that would appear when the player was on 3 health, and increase in size when the player takes damage, adding a bit of pressure and intensity to the screen, which I thought was pretty neat. I also got some feedback regarding the slime pet that he looked really weird when entering rooms, as he'd kinda just slide under the door. So to fix this, I made a simple animation where the pet just kinda shrinks under the door when encountering one. It's definitely not the best, but I guess it's better than the old non-animation. Next, you may recall that we had these birds in the game that were placed around the rooms to make things feel a little more alive. But I got some feedback that it'd be really cool if these birds would become more corrupted as the game progresses and the world becomes more corrupted. I really like this idea, so I made a few additional versions of this bird and set everything up, which I thought was just a nice touch. I also made it so these birds would fade out once colliding with a wall, as previously they would just go through the fog and look kinda weird. Next up, I got some feedback from some of my playtesters that there should be a chest room that would occasionally spawn. This way, the player would be rewarded with weapons, upgrades, and ammo as a little bonus for just exploring different rooms. So I created this room template with a chest, but this felt a little empty, so I made this slime statue to go inside of it, which definitely helped. Then I made these rooms spawn every now and then inside of levels and set the actual chest logic up. Basically, these chests can either drop slime balls, weapon ammo, battery ammo, a random upgrade, a random weapon, or some kind of combination. So yeah, those are the new chest rooms, pretty cool stuff. Now for the final change I made in this devlog was a new rain system in Slimekeep. Right now, days or levels in Slimekeep felt pretty similar to each other. There just wasn't really much visual variation to stimulate the player. So to fix this, I decided to make a rain/weather system for the game, meaning that for each day the player plays, there would be a chance that that day would be rainy. And to get started, I made a simple rain particle system that would just overlay across the game scene. These particles definitely looked cool in my opinion, but it still didn't really feel like it was actually raining. So to sell this effect further, I added in these dark cloud particles, which made it really look like it was thunderstorming and provided a more eerie feel to the scene. Finally, to wrap up the rain system, I simply added a blue tint to the whole game to make it look, well, more rainy out. And there we go, that is the new rain system. Right now, there's just a 1 in 8 chance for it to rain on any given day, which I think is nice because it's not too common, but it's also likely you'll experience at least one rainy day in each playthrough to provide some visual contrast. Anyways, that's all I have for this devlog. If you liked it, please consider wishlisting the game on Steam and hitting that subscribe button. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.